Hello, welcome back to the Amateur Radio License course. You know, the more that you understand how radio equipment works, the better it is, or the better prepared you are to resolve any issues that might crop up along the way. And it may seem a little bit overwhelming at first, but with a little perseverance and persistence, you can master all this in no time. Fortunately for the technician license examination, you're only expected to understand, some of the basic concepts. We're not expecting you to go out and design a radio from scratch or transceiver from scratch, or to be able to completely repair one right out of the gate. Anyway, are you ready to learn? Well, let's get started. This is Lesson 7, Part 1. I'm Gary Stevens, KE2GS, your instructor. In Lesson 7, we're going to be talking about station equipment. There are 4 exam questions out of 4 groups, and the groups are common transmitter and receiver problems, antenna measurements, troubleshooting, and basic repair and testing. In the first section, we're going to be talking about receivers, transmitters, transceivers, modulation, transverters, and transmit and receive amplifiers. The sensitivity of a receiver describes the magnitude or strength of an input signal needed to produce an output signal. In order to achieve this, it has to have a low signal-to-noise ratio. For the exam, know that sensitivity is a term that describes the ability of a receiver to detect the presence of a signal. We use the term transceiver quite a bit, but what is it? It's simply a transmitter and a receiver combined with a switch in the middle. For the exam, know that a transceiver is a unit combining the functions of a transmitter and a receiver. A mixer, a frequency mixer, is an electrical circuit that creates a new frequency from those two signals that are applied to it. So an RF signal and a local oscillator would create an intermediate frequency. For the exam, all you need to know is that a mixer is used to convert a radio signal from one frequency to another. Selectivity is a measure of the performance of a radio receiver to respond only to the radio signal that it's tuned to. For the exam, need to know that selectivity is a term that describes the ability of a receiver to discriminate between multiple signals. An oscillator is an electronic circuit that produces periodic or oscillating electrical signals. It's mostly or most often a sine wave or a square wave. For the exam, you need to know that an oscillator is the name of a circuit that generates a signal at a specific frequency. Transverters are used in amateur radio to convert radio transceivers designed to be used in HF or VHF bands to operate in higher frequencies, sometimes even into the microwave bands, well up into the gigahertz. For the exam, just know that a transverter is a device that converts an RF input and output of a transceiver to another band. We're all familiar with what push-to-talk is, so for the exam, just know that the push-to-talk function that switches between the receive and transmit is what is meant by PTT. PTT for push-to-talk. The following is a military training video that I think helps describe what modulation is or how it works. So let's watch this and then we'll continue with our questions.
The information or intelligence to be transmitted starts as sound waves which travel through air. The microphone picks up these waves and transforms them into electrical energy. Now the intelligence travels into the transmitter, taking the form of audio frequency voltages. Audio frequencies in military equipment generally fall within a range of from 300 to 3,000 cycles per second. However, it is not practical to transmit these audio frequencies directly. An oscillator provides a much higher frequency. This radio frequency wave is called a carrier. By means of a modulator and one or more RF amplifiers, the amplitude variations of the audio signal and the radio frequency carrier are combined. Now the intelligence takes the form of amplitude variations in the carrier. The amplitude modulated RF carrier is fed to the antenna, from which it is radiated through space to the...
For the exam, understand that modulation describes the combining of speech with an RF carrier signal. Linear amplifiers have a mode switch that basically changes filters to minimize undesirable emissions. For the exam, know that the function of the SSB/CW-FM switch on a VHF power amplifier is to set the amplifier for proper operation in the selected mode. An RF amplifier is just simply a device that increases the power output of a handheld transceiver or a lower powered mobile device. For the exam, note that an RF amplifier is a device that increases the low power output of a handheld transceiver. As higher frequencies are easily attenuated, the signals become weaker. To overcome this obstacle, a preamp can be used to boost the RF signal before it enters into the receiver. So for the exam, note that an RF preamplifier is installed between a transmitter and an antenna tuner. In B, we're going to cover the common transmitter and receiver problems. Things like symptoms of overload and overdrive, distortion, causes of interference and consumer electronics, Part 15 devices, over-modulation, RF feedback, and off-frequency signals. One common issue that we encounter all the time is people talking too close to the microphone. So if you're told that your FM handheld or mobile transceiver is over deviating, talk further away from the microphone, please. Many radio receivers on the market are cheaply made, and they skip a lot of corners. For the exam, you need to know that the cause of broadcast AM and FM radios receiving amateur radio transmissions unintentionally is that the receiver is unable to reject strong signals outside the AM and FM band. For the exam, you need to understand that there are three types of interference: fundamental overload, harmonics, and spurious emissions. So for the exam, just know that those can cause radio frequency interference, or RFI. Telephones are prone to being interfered with by amateur radios. One way to reduce it or eliminate it is a device called an RFI or an RF filter that can be placed in line with the telephone jack. For the exam, just know that a way to reduce or eliminate interference from an amateur radio to a nearby telephone is to put an RF filter on the telephone line. Ham gear can also interfere with commercial or non-amateur radios and television sets. Know for the exam that overload of a non-amateur radio or TV receiver by an amateur signal can be reduced or eliminated if you block the amateur signal with a filter at the antenna input of the affected receiver. Verily I say to you that unless you live in a remote, desolate area, at some point your equipment will likely cause interference with one of your neighbors. Remember for the exam and for life that if a neighbor tells you that your station's transmissions are interfering with their radio, TV, telephone, whatever, make sure that your station is functioning properly and that it does not cause interference with your own radio, television, or phone when it's tuned to the same channel. Band reject or band stop filter is one that passes the frequencies that you desire, but it attenuates the undesired frequencies to a very low level. For the exam, know that a band reject filter can reduce overload to a VHF transceiver from a nearby FM broadcast station. Sometimes your neighbor is the one causing all the harmful interference your station is picking up. So if it would be a good steward and work with your neighbor to identify the offending device, politely inform your neighbor about the rules that prohibit the use of such devices that cause interference, and check your station just to make sure that it meets the standards of good amateur practices, and know all this for the exam. And sometimes we purchase electronics that's inexpensive, and it's inexpensive for a reason. The corners are cut, and they don't always do or perform as we really hope. For the exam, know that a Part 15 device is an unlicensed device that may emit low-powered radio signals or frequencies used by licensed services. So your next-door neighbor's telephone may interfere with your reception or transmission. Any good real estate agent will tell you it's location, location, location. For the exam, you need to know that if you receive a report that your audio signal through the receiver is distorted or unintelligible, check your transmitter that may be slightly off frequency, your batteries could be running low, or you could be in a bad location. Also for the exam, you need to know that a symptom of RF feedback, radio frequency feedback, in a transmitter or a transceiver is you get reports that they're garbled, distorted, or unintelligible voice transmissions. When it comes to good reception of television, radio, any type of electromagnetic signal, it's all about the cabling and grounding and shielding. So the first step to resolve a cable TV interference problem from your ham radio transmission is to be sure that all TV coaxial connections are installed properly. Well, I certainly hope that you enjoyed this lesson. If you like this series, please subscribe to my channel and show your support. Until next time, never stop learning.